here. Wait till we see some folks joining. Make sure everything is going the way that we want. Just gonna do a quick little stream today. I wanted to talk about two things, both kind of relating to crypto in the larger context. So the first is, I guess yesterday, let's pull this up. So yesterday, CCN, which is one of the crypto publications that I guess a lot of people know, maybe, announced that it was shutting down, and the culprit was Google. And so basically the idea was that there was no, I do not want to allow you notifications, thanks. So anyways, the idea was that basically Google changed its search algorithm, and in the wake of that, there was pretty much no way for it to stay in business. That their traffic plummeted overnight, and it was Google's fault. So you can kind of see, here's the update, and here's their traffic plummeted. And so there's a bunch to say about this. One is, let's talk about, I guess, Google first. You kind of have this scenario where anytime you're relying on third-party platforms, you're kind of subjecting yourself to their whims, right? Like if ultimately Facebook decides to kick application developers off, there's nothing you can do. When Apple makes a change like forcing you to use or accept their single sign-on for in lieu of traditional social sign-on like Google and Facebook, you have to do it, you have to comply, it's their ecosystem, or you get out, right? Like that's kind of the idea. So I think that it's, there is a reality that if you build your business on top of someone else's platform, you're going to have a challenge, right? At the same time, I think that to me this feels a lot like distraction and a lot like a convenient excuse. And so maybe it's true, but like your business shouldn't be so subject, especially if you're a media business, to the whims of a third-party search engine, right? Like it's crazy to me that your traffic would be so wholly focused on, gaming the Google search engines and search referral links and things like that. Like that means it's not high quality traffic in general. And so I particularly bristled with this because I think CCN is one of the bajillion publications in crypto that are just like total basically spam factories that don't actually contribute any value. I've spent a year doing Long Read Sunday now and reading basically everything in the space that comes out from an interesting, credible reporter or from an interesting, credible publication. And not once has a CCN article been on the top of that. Not as an op-ed, not as a breaking news story, right? This is a no-value contribution news site. And I'm sorry if that's harsh, but it's just the case. And there are lots and lots of others that are still out there like that. And this is why I've asked previously whether there are actually any crypto publications worth paying attention to, kind of other than a small handful, other than maybe the Block, Decrypt, CoinDesk, Bitcoin Magazine. I think that one of the things that makes crypto interesting is the extent to which non-professional media, so podcasters in particular, have totally dominated the space and are the best sources of information and are actually better in a lot of ways to learn kind of what the space is thinking and feeling at any given time. It's not coming from publications in the traditional way. I mean, I think I'm encouraged to see that in the last year, we've had three or four new publications start up, plus a couple of really interesting, video focused sites pop up as well. But I don't know, I guess I'm sitting here not mourning the loss. Let's put it this way. I think this is a company that didn't contribute any value and, built itself around gaming a search algorithm, got screwed when the algorithm changed. And guess what? That's the story. That's how it works. I think that we need to pay attention in crypto to actual valuable value add participants in the ecosystem, and maybe not kind of leverage this narrative of anti-big tech quite so much. So that's all I have to say about that. It's been frustrating me for a couple days to see how many people were really like stoked to pick up this narrative of, oh, Big Bad Google shut it down. I just think that's a little ridiculous. Let's get to something else that was interesting, though. So Mary Meeker. So for those of you who don't know, Mary Meeker is a venture capitalist. She was at Kleiner Perkins for a long time and recently spun out her own firm, which has a lot of assets under management. It's really exciting to kind of see her transition, because for a long time, since 1995 actually, she's been doing what have been kind of the definitive internet trends reports, which is an amazing series of output. And these things are literally between 200 and 350 slides of just data. So growth and penetration of mobile. She watches all the trends and kind of keeps track of everything. And so, so Melton was tweeting about this. They announced yesterday that her new report would be coming out today. And she was kind of speculating how many slides will Bitcoin and blockchain get. I went back and looked at last year's just to kind of get a sense of what our baseline was and maybe what we could expect today. And there was only one slide last year. One slide even after the insanity that was the ICO boom. One slide even after ICOs and token sales raised such a huge amount more than traditional seed stage venture capital over the course of 2017 and the beginning of 2018. Now, one slide last year was basically, it was Coinbase's growth, and it was kind of buried in the innovation section. So I was less, by the time that this, by the time I saw kind of this was coming out, I was maybe a little bit less optimistic at what we'd see in there. And so sure enough, turns out that there were no dedicated slides. There was a literal mention of it in, I think, the God, what was it? The crime section, basically, that cryptocurrencies were allowing for easier cybercrime through extortion. And there might have been one other. I think there was one other in the section on online education. There was a slide, or in the slide about the most popular courses online. One of them was about Bitcoin and blockchain. So this, I think is pretty interesting. She's picking up on all the other trends, right? She spends a ton of time on Twitch. She spends a ton of time on kind of the emergence of podcasts and how that's changed. She even talks a lot about kind of the splinternet and the situation of global regulation, where you've got a really diverse set of or you have a very balkanized kind of world emerging, where what your experience of the internet is pretty well shaped by where you are. And all of those things are super interesting, but there's nothing about Bitcoin or blockchain. And so, when I was thinking about it, I wasn't exactly sure where she would focus, right? Like, what's the stat that you would put attention on? Like, maybe it's the amount of capital raised through ICOs over the last couple of years and how that trend has changed. Maybe you do it in terms of kind of worldwide adoption and penetration of something like Bitcoin. I think to not mention it at all is really interesting. And so there's a couple possible diagnoses for this. One is it's just insanely early. I think Suna from Token Daily said something interesting, which was that for anyone who feels like they're too late, this is a great indication of why that's not the case, which I thought was interesting and pretty true. A second thing that it might be, which I think is at least interesting and worth considering, is whether it has to do with kind of the bifurcation of technology from money, right? Like, she's writing about internet trends, technology trends, and Bitcoin lives in this weird space where it is, on the one hand, undeniably a technology trend. It's enabled by technology. But it's really, as a lot of the Bitcoiners have been arguing for a long time, not primarily, at least insofar, a huge technology shift, although that's part of the aspiration for a lot of companies. Instead, what it is a shift in money, and a shift in how people think about money, and who prints money and who has access to money and how they use it. And I think that there is at least some positive spin potentially, in the sense that lack of recognition from kind of the heart of Silicon Valley maybe has to do with the fact that it is actually settling into its place as a money innovation more than a technology innovation per se. I don't know. That's the one thing I can find. I do think that it reflects, just how much this isn't registering on the radar of a lot of folks yet. So that'll be interesting to watch. I thought it was an interesting detail. As with anything, this is one person's opinion, and even if it's influential, I don't think it means anything other than it's just an interesting data point. A couple other things I just wanted to touch on quickly that I thought were interesting that I've been seeing. So one is there's a lot of conversations starting, and I think you'll see this picking up around potential regulation from the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is a kind of diverse global body that's trying to effectively align international policy around anti-money laundering. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch what sort of momentum they can get behind this, right? Because this is basically trying to cut off regulatory arbitrage, through geographic location and some other strategies by getting everyone in the world to cooperate. And just today, CoinDesk wrote about how the G20 seems to be in support of what they do. This create huge implications. It's Jack. So Jack's a researcher for Masari, and basically any place that you're touching crypto at all, effectively, that's trying to comply with anything, especially if you're moving fiat to crypto in any way, it's full KYC, and so on. So that's obviously got huge implications for how people use these technologies, and who gets to use them and for what. So this is more a story to watch than a story that I think is something that's kind of transpired so far. But I would definitely check it out if you haven't had a chance to spend any time with the kind of proposed rules. It's worthwhile. Another interesting thing, kind of a discussion that I think maybe relates a little bit, is Tara pulled up a bunch of kind of Google trends around Bitcoin and the search terms by Bitcoin, which is, again, one small data point, but still pretty interesting to keep track of. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that he found is that there was a ton of action in Lagos and Accra in Ghana. And so I kind of went out and asked, what was going on? Is this a new phenomenon? Is this like kind of an emergent growth? And Yele, who works for Binance in North Africa, had some really interesting things to say. So, he basically made the argument that there's a combination of kind of foreign exchange type transactions happening there, as well as speculative investment. And so this would be kind of like pretty similar to other parts of the world. And so when I pushed and asked, whether this was something that was a new factor or just kind of ongoing, he basically said there's no recent catalyst, just the kind of slow, steady increase in activity, which I think is really interesting. I mean, this to me feels like really interesting markets for this. So, one of the things that before I was doing crypto and anything even technology related, I was doing kind of global social entrepreneurship stuff. And so we were, working with organizations, especially in East Africa and the Middle East, on kind of entrepreneurial and business-based solutions to global problems and getting students involved with them. And one of the things that you find when you go work in either just economic development or social impact in any way is the extent to which these economies are informal, right? And so if you look at statistics or estimates, the estimates that I've seen most recently are that something like 60% of the workers around the world, something like 2 billion workers, are part of the informal economy instead of the formal economy. And the informal economy is kind of, it's not necessarily, or in fact, usually like a shadow economy or things that aren't really, allowed or anything like that. It's more, single household type business providers who do something for their local area, or who do something kind of just off the books because the cost of compliance would be huge, or who do things and provide services that aren't approved because of moralistic regulatory regimes, right? So the informal economy is hugely important. It intersects with the formal economy. It's not kind of just like Silk Road or anything like that. And it wouldn't surprise me to see, as the emergence of particularly mobile infrastructure gets better, and as the emergence of crypto infrastructure for mobile at lower bandwidth gets better, to see some of these tools become parts of that informal economy and become really useful. So I think it's just something that's really interesting to watch. And I maybe guess one more point on that, which is just a fun kind of conversation to build off of it, is Linda from Scalar asked, where do you see major crypto adoption happening first, in developed countries or developing countries? I think the developed country thing is obvious to some extent. There's huge speculative use here, and you're seeing, I think, in DeFi a really interesting open financial kind of primitive that relies on you having access to a type of collateral that a lot of people don't like or don't respect so far, which is obviously crypto assets. That's to me, a pretty developed world use case at the moment. It's not kind of like a bank the unbanked thing. This is a um, loans that are based on my own collateral should be permissionless kind of a thing, which I still think has a lot of interesting value. But it's certainly kind of not a world changing in the same way that some of the aspirational bank the unbanked kind of stuff that we hear about is. Meanwhile, in the developing world, I actually think that maybe we spend a little bit too much time talking about some of those bank the unbanked use cases. And maybe like the use case to me that seems interesting is wealth preservation, in particular in unstable monetary regimes. I think that's what you're seeing, and access to sort of like foreign exchange type opportunities beyond the realm of really aggressive regulation that's meant to keep power in power rather than enable people to do what they need to do with their money. I think that's what you're seeing in places like Venezuela. You're not seeing kind of like a wholesale adoption of cryptocurrency per se. You're seeing just, some number of people who have access to the tools to use these technologies, taking advantage of their permissionless nature to kind of get a leg up and work around the system that's pretty well stacked against them. So I think those are really interesting. Now, I guess one more shout out to Tyrone Ross. I think he'd make the point that there's a whole lot of gray area in what we mean, and that there's a lot of parts of the U.S. and other developed countries that are themselves economically kind of disenfranchised relative to the rest of the economy, that some of these crypto tools could be really useful for, because the infrastructure is there, the kind of the full technology stack is there. It's really just a question of applying it in a way that's useful. So I think that it's a cool question maybe to jump off from, more than to have an answer for. Certainly this is kind of one of the things that got me excited about crypto and Bitcoin and continues to keep me here. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. So anyways, thanks guys for hanging out. Just wanted to do a quick stream to chat about some of the things that I was seeing, and I will be back soon. Cheers.